26th of March 2024. I'm Dana Durnford. And I'm also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. We got a good show for everybody tonight. We're going to do a time machine show tonight. Hope you're feeling well. The Shimbun is a major media in Japan. And they're calling for a new TEPCO investigation. And as usual, we're going to go to the full screen. Just in case you're using smartphones or tablets or something, that way you can actually read it too. And we got a poll for everybody tonight. Let me touch on that before we jump. Would the world be better off without the degenerate, dirty nuclear power plants? And they should rename them as disease factories because they're hemorrhaging radiation. So the problem with spent fuel and waste is it's splitting atoms into the environment. That means no life. So we're going to the time machine. We're going to be doing... So check your dates on the shows. All the shows are going to be older stories. All the stories we're going to cover. They're very important and very informative too. An editorial put out today, February 8, 2013, by the Shimbun media calls for a new diet, which is like a parliament and a senate and a congress and that. Investigation in Japan. In Japan, the Senate is called a diet. Investigation to the Fukushima Daiichi accident. The events came out this week that showed TEPCO has purposely deceived members of the Diet Accident Investigation Committee. And TEPCO lied about the conditions within the Unit 1 reactor in an attempt to dissuade the investigators from doing an on-site inspection of the emergency cooling system at Unit 1. And today they claimed they're preparing to get the fuel out of the buildings. There still hasn't been an independent inspection done. These are all meltdowns. They've lost all the inventories. This information regarding the number one's cooling system is critical as the investigation concludes that mostly based on TEPCO's disclosed information that the cooling systems were not damaged by the earthquake. Because if they were damaged by the earthquake, and they were, what that means is you have to reevaluate all nuclear power plants because now they're vulnerable to earthquakes. And that's what happened at Fukushima. It shifted Japan, I think it was 6 feet to the north. And the pipes are carrying 1 million gallons a minute to each reactor. And so when you separate that, that is a significant event. And that's guaranteed to be a meltdown. It's guaranteed to be a meltdown. Number one started melting about 50 minutes after the cooling stopped. There's a lot of evidence already suggesting the earthquake is what caused it. Certainly for the number one reactor. And that fuel pool was melted too. Double fuel pools. Worker interviews in the Atlantic in 2011 disclosed that they saw broken steam pipes and steam leaks as they fled the building during the earthquake. So they actually seen broken steam pipes and steam hemorrhaging out as they fled the building of the number one reactor. TEPCO has continued to deny this, but also was uncooperative with the Daiichi investigation's attempts to check this for themselves. So imagine, this is the only industry that I know has so much power that Congress can't even compel them to disclose. More censorship in Japan and worldwide. A Japanese blogger has documented multiple instances of the video of Unit 3 exploding being removed from YouTube. And he concluded links to the Pacific videos along with the takedown dates. One states that Fukushima Central Television has forced the takedown of these videos. And Unit 3 detonation is right here. So clearly it ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools. And the plume model, based on facts, but not all the facts, just actually the models are mostly based on venting. This is not venting. The building behind me is 19 stories, it's 190 feet, 65 meters. And so the reactor core and the fuel pools were ejected right out of the buildings, particularly Unit 3 in particular. Increase in cesium in urine from Fukushima. Children in Fukushima region were tested initially in May, this is September the 8th, 2011, and more recently in late July 2011. This testing is independent of any government efforts and is conducted by French. One of the children tested saw an increase rather than a decrease in cesium levels. The child did not evacuate and raises concerns about the effectiveness of decontamination and other efforts to lower exposures in Fukushima. Thank goodness for hindsight, eh? Thank goodness for hindsight. Every story of Fukushima is insane. So if you read the story 2016, they had 30 million one-ton bags. 30 million one-ton bags. And you can see how crazy they are. They're growing food right alongside the one-ton bags. And those sites, there was, if you read that story, you'll find that there's over 105,000 of these sites of one-ton bags. And even Al Jazeera, 30 million tons of contaminated soil are stocked in open-air sites. Russia spends millions of taxpayer dollars on nuclear public relation and censorship. All nuclear countries are doing it. And it's your tax dollars and they're weaponized it against you. Since the Fukushima disaster, Russia officials have started multiple programs to censor online content and create public relation efforts to hide some of the worst nuclear problems in Russia. And activists discovered multiple large contracts that are quite similar to the censorship and PR campaign in Japan. One of the efforts involved purging a certain percentage of web searches results that were unflattering to the nuclear industry. So they purged a certain percentage of the web search results that weren't unflattering, that were shown the industry was monstrous. Other efforts included complex efforts involving team of sociologists. I do believe we got a few of them hanging out here from the industry. They like to embed themselves in the comment sections. They're not always here, but... And they'll try to draw all their attention towards them, so you don't look at this. And they'll try to immerse you in their personal issues. And rarely acknowledge nuclear. We had one that was in our comment section for 3 years before we realized that that was actually a pro-nuclear public relation firm. They're ruthless, eh? And I mean, there's no limit to evil when it comes to these people, if you want to call them people. Graphic designers that would feed the media stories with a pro-nuclear spin and use the arts to push their agenda. What makes it even more troubling is that it's being funded by taxpayer dollars, and the very people who are being lied to and having their voices eradicated online are paying for their own deception and oppression. And that appears to be the case in Japan and Canada and the United States and many other countries. This industry, it just, what's the word for it? When you meet them, you can smell the evil on them. Literally smell it in the air when they walk through a room. Fukushima put contaminated soybeans to the market. 10 tons of soybean were sent to the market from Daiichi City, which as we know now is a nuclear wasteland. And all of the samples listed show contamination. The total cesium found is the furthest right column. And it also did not say where they would be going to. So the furthest right column, this is what they're talking about, becquerels per kilogram of cesium. Because gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, the only one they'll acknowledge is gamma. And just cesium at that. It's just unbelievable, isn't it? This industry. And it's gotten away with it for so long, now it feels entitled, right? TEPCO set the ALPS operation for September. TEPCO sent a press release announcing their plan to attempt to operate the ALPS by September of this year. So ALPS in 2013, July the 1st, still wasn't operating. Now I posted that little video tonight in my video section, and there's a link in the description to the video. I'm going to play the clip of 2000, this is 2013 also, where they say TEPCO admits that they have no control and that the tanks are already full.
The Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control. and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
So there's nothing in the tanks. Just the reality of it. TEPCO releases video of groundwater entering the complex. The water they're talking about is 2.2 sieverts per litre. That's what's gone into the tanks. That means you can, if they actually, so they didn't put it into the tanks. The tanks are actually empty. Because if you put those numbers in the tanks, you can only build one tank and you got to leave the site for 1 million years. So there really isn't anything in the tanks, right? The existing water treatment facility can remove mainly cesium. But that's simply not true. The system they're talking about, there was two, the Urine and the Sari, S-A-R-R-Y, and the cesium atoms, isotopes, are the same size as every other atom. They're all the same size. You can't just filter one exclusively. It just doesn't work that way. Like, there is one way that you can do it, cyclotrons, right? Where they aggregate the plutonium like that, stuff like this. But, or uranium-235. But you can't do it with filtration systems because all the atoms are the same size. There is no water filtration system. The only one that they had was the Areva system, and that didn't work at all, period. They didn't even turn it on. It was strictly eye candy, so you would look away. The tanks are not filled with anything, because if you fill the tanks up, then they got to do something with it. And if they have an earthquake, you got a 1.4 million sieverts per tank. You can never get back on the site again. Everything is hemorrhage flowed directly into the ocean. There is no containment. And there's no filtration system. It's crazy to suggest there's a filtration system. They said we're planning to commence actual operation September that year, 2013. But the video that I showed you just now from BBC and that I posted a few hours ago in my video section, not my live section, not my short section, but my video section, clearly demonstrates a conflict. Unit 3 Daiichi pool accident analysts. Unit 3. And it's almost like you got to be schizophrenic to have a conversation about this topic. Just bear with me, waiting for the system to catch up here. Here we go. So here's Reactor 3. The fuel pools are at the top of the building with the reactor core. There's no top to the building. And the fuel pools are very brittle because of decades of neutron bombardments. And they have a liner. And so even if it was managed to stay intact for a little while, the shock wave would have destroyed the liner anyway. TEPCO announced this week the 1.5-ton mast for the refueling crane fell into the pool and sank as they tried to remove debris from the pool. Again, there's no pool. The only pull there is your leg. And they're pulling your leg. This is a Medusa. This is the plutonium mixed oxide fuel site. Just bear with me. TEPCO announced this week 1.5-ton mask for refueling crane fell into the pool and sank as they tried to remove the debris from the pool. In all honesty, you need a better depiction. I'll get it for you in a second here. TEPCO has done some testing of radiation levels and does not think there was fuel damage based on not finding drastically elevated levels. This is a story, February 9, 2013. So they're saying there's no drastically elevated levels. So how are you supposed to have a future with this industry wrecking it on you? It does not think the fuel damage based on not finding drastically elevated levels. The mass falling could create a couple of potential damage situations. It could fall and damage the fuel assemblies held in a pool. It could also damage or puncture the spent fuel pool metal liner, causing a leak in the pool. Let's see, the pool is at the top of the building. Oh, that's right, there's no top to the building. And there's no reactor cores, and the two fuel pools are gone. But let's pretend that they're right. TEPCO released these photos of the pool work showing where the crane is and debris being removed in relative location. This is not, I don't think this is the official picture, but this is what it would have looked like, I think. The wall frames are at the top of each photo. And I think they're talking about these photos here. So you can see the crane they're talking about over there, can you? And this is allegedly the pool. Of course, the fuel pool is at the very top of the building, so is the reactor core. There is no top to the building. And so most likely we're looking at Photoshop. And one of the reasons I'm going to say that is, well, there's quite a few reasons, I suppose, but these two items right here don't belong. They're not. They should be covered in debris, right? It should be covered in dust and everything else. Whatever this is, this doesn't belong there. You can't physically get near this place. This building blew up. Multiple reactor cores are gone. And you say that's the crane, but what are they talking about? If that was the pool, let's say it was the pool, well, everything's in the pool, right? According to that picture, the crane is not actually in the pool. Like, it's so schizophrenic. So the story is the word that the crane collapsed and might have damaged something in the pool. But look at all the stuff that they're showing in the pool. But this is not the actual pool. I don't know what it is, but it ain't Reactor 3. We know that because Reactor 3 looks like that. And we know where the fuel pools are. They're at the top of the building. And you don't have to be a structural engineer to understand there's no top to the building. But anyway, they come in with these pictures. And nothing makes any sense when TEPCO tells the story, I noticed. It could also damage or puncture the spent fuel pool metal liner, causing a leak in the pool. And they show you, I've got a whole bunch of these pictures. But there's a couple of weird pictures. So this one is snow, and they got something scratched out. Blatantly scratched out, right? I got no idea what they're up to. So, it's winter time, it's minus 30 something, right? And everything is frozen solid. And so if you take a hose and spray a bunch of water up there, you might get the appearance temporarily of water, like a gullible person might interpret it as a pool, right? But I'd be very cautious when the evidence clearly exists to say that there is no fuel pools, there is no reactor core in Reactor 3. They were ejected right into the buildings. These are lethal doses we're talking about. So the official story came out that this now was the pool, and this was 2020 or 2019 or something like that, where they claimed they were, and it was all the media ran out with this story the one time. Back in 2014, TEPCO managed to remove 1,535 units of fuel inside of Reactor 4, but they didn't. Reactor 4 was completely gutted. There was nothing. But when you look at Reactor, let's look at Reactor 3. The fuel pools are at the top of the building. The pictures up there, the official pictures that they're in the pool, that doesn't exist. The building, the original footage clearly shows the reactor core and the fuel pool doesn't exist. And this story from 2013, I believe it is just more propaganda, and there's perpetual propaganda. TEPCO's tungsten vest. TEPCO's tungsten vest. Let me see here. I know I have a folder with pictures, but that was one of them. That's their tungsten vest, right? And this ain't nuclear scientists in paper suits and tungsten vests, I can assure you. That's the homeless and the destitute. And so they claim workers were wearing them to enter Unit 2 back in 2011. But you couldn't, nobody's ever entered Reactor 2. It's 100% meltdown, and the fuel plant burnt constantly for days. Unit 2 liquefied, and what was left of the reactor core in the fuel pool went China syndrome. Reactor 2. That's Reactor 2. So that's the one building that looks like it's intact, right? But it actually burnt constantly for days. And then it went China syndrome. Fission restarted at Fukushima reactor number 2. And TEPCO was not injecting boric acid. And we've done presentations on all the pictures they released, clearly showing that that never happened. Explosion at Reactor 1, by the way, reportedly caused by the quake. That was one we were looking for earlier. Fukushima 1, the Daiichi plant. Workers enter Reactor 2 building, and this was the link from the previous story they linked to. Enter Reactor 2 building in tungsten vest. Oh yeah, sure they did. It's the first time the workers entered the reactor building since March. This was May the 17th, March, April, May. Like, it's absurd to suggest they went into a building. When there was an explosion in the suppression chamber. Reactor 1 we're talking about, Reactor 2. The explosion was in the fuel pools in the reactor core. Yeah, everybody knows this. But look at the lies that they told us. According to the Shimbun, 4 workers entered the reactor buildings of Reactor 2 at 9:30 a.m. to survey the interior of the building. It's so ridiculous, such a ridiculous story. For equipment calibration and installation of the cooling system. 2 months after. The workers will also go to the second floor of Reactor 2 building, and the workers wear a tungsten vest to prevent external radiation exposure, and they also carry oxygen tanks on them. It doesn't work that way, though. You're talking about neutron bombardments, beta rays, gamma shines, X-rays, alpha bursts. It's lethal doses. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. The interior of Reactor 2 was hundreds and hundreds of sieverts. Just close to the building, rather. It simply couldn't be done. So robots cannot be used for a survey? Somebody asked. Another person says, I heard the robots went on strike. No, they died. Japanese government used seafood and goods made in Fukushima, Miyagi, Iwate as aid to developing nations as part of ODA. ODA. I'm not sure what that was. I forgot to look it up. It's a lot of money, and they're going to ship food from the nuclear wasteland in 2011 to countries that don't know any better. To buy up canned fish, wheelchairs, and other industrial products from the disaster-affected area and offer them to developing nations. In other words, it's how they're going to get rid of their radioactive stuff. The purpose for the plan is twofold, according to NHK. First, to aid the developing nations, of course not. And second, and more importantly, to erase. And secondly, and more importantly, it's not secondly in that case, then it's number 1, right? More importantly, is it's considered number 1, not number 2. To erase for once and all the baseless rumors about radiation contamination of the Japanese product and products in the minds of people in developing nations. So if they give you radioactive food, therefore there was no radioactive. It's a baseless rumor that there was radiation. These are ruthless scum. How else could you describe them? Only ruthless scum. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is asking for US $221 million. And if you look at the planned projects at the ministry, you read like a subline lesson in irony and cynicism. The 1 billion yen for inviting the internet, which is, what is that? I've done the math actually. That's $9 million. $9 million for IAEA experts for their advice. I got into the round business. And how to wind down the Fukushima 1 Daiichi nuclear plant accident. Just inviting the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has no sovereignty over any country, it's just a corporation like McDonald's. It's set up the exact same way, right? 1 billion yen is 9 million Canadian. Basically $3.50 American. From the second supplementary budget, 1.5 billion yen for inviting people with big Facebook and Twitter followers in the United States. And we covered all that back then, actually. Europe and the Middle East to Fukushima, Miyagi, Iwate, and wine and dine them with local product. from the nuclear wasteland. Dead man tells no tales, I suppose. With the hope that they will spread the word to their followers that Japan is safe, launching a media blitz overseas using celebrities to appeal the safety of Japan's products. So not science, but revolting propaganda, degenerate propaganda. Monstrous, hideous, odious. Just, what's wrong with these people? They're not even people. It's unspeakable. They're bandits. They're terrorists. That's the only way you can describe them, right? They're not heels or charlatans. They're thugs. They're good for nothing. They're unspeakable. They're monstrous in every sense of that word. Using celebrities to appeal to the safety of Japanese products. Well, it's not a lot of money, 1.5 billion. That's about $14 million for influencers on Facebook and Twitter. It's literally a nightmare. So the only people that they're going to, like, they're talking about people like Stinkfoot, right? And when almost all the stories they link to are gone. For the record, Fukushima number 1, Daiichi, nuclear power plant reactor 3 operating floor situation summary of 2013, the end of 2013, the very last day of 2013, December the 31st. About the steam rising from a gap near the shield plug. The shield plug. Well, the explosions can only be caused by a meltdown. The shield plug is where the reactor 3 and reactor core and the fuel pools. It's the top of the reactor core, basically, which is at the top of the building that doesn't exist anymore. For more posts on the subject, go to waste your time because the link is not there. The air dose rate, which is gamma radiation, why wouldn't you measure everything else? Like in that scenario, you're measuring neutrons first, gammas second, maybe, right? On the operating floor of reactor 3, particularly around the shield plug, there is no operating floor left in the building. The building doesn't exist anymore. I mean, that explosion, they felt the explosion 25 miles away. So around a shield plug, they're very high. Like, what are you talking about? Like, don't forget that the water cannons, which are on the other side of the pump house, couldn't get near the building. And that's just, you see the shield plug they're talking about? These are maniacs that suggest that even exists. But it is more likely that high air dose rates are not from the occasional weak, W-E-A-K, steam from the spot as seen in the infrared images above, but from the contamination from the fallout in 2011. So they're saying it's not from the weak steam coming out of reactor 3. It's not from that. That's weak steam, folks. It's not steam. It's lethal. That's an immediate lethal dose. Your organs melt and you sit down and excrete your intestines and then you die. That's how it works. Your organs actually melt. And you know this because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They found a lot of people had squatted down to excrete their organs because they melted. And then they just died. And some of them didn't even fall over. They just died right where they were. They were burnt so bad they were petrified on top of that. This is an industry that entire legacy is predicated upon deceit, dishonesty, deception, and omnicide. Bacteria are eating plastic dumped into the sea. Scientists believe they have partly solved the mystery of what happens to rubbish dumped into the water. You know, we were doing research expeditions for 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year on the ocean without coming home. Very difficult times. And one of the things I couldn't wrap my mind around is, where did all the debris go on the coastline? It was and I was a commercial diver too, right? So I'm very familiar with the coastline, and there was just a ridiculous amount of pollution. But when I was up there for 6 years doing research expeditions from Vancouver to British Columbia, it was really, if you look at all the pictures on my website, it's very rare to see any kind of debris, any kind of garbage. I still don't know why. Wild mushrooms in Fukushima tested 28,000 becquerels a kilogram of radioactive cesium. So why don't you test for uranium and plutonium and americium and neptunium and strontiums? Because you can't get funding, right? You can only get funding for cesium because that's what is used to manipulate the consensus in the population. And it's been going on for 8 decades. Eight decades of perpetual propaganda. Eight decades of perpetual propaganda. It's not food anymore, it's simply radioactive material. As a young man at the Citizens Radioactivity Measuring Station in Fukushima said, of the radioactive mushrooms in Germany's ZDF program aired on August the 9th, 2011. So the Citizens Radioactivity Measuring Station in Fukushima City, which is a nuclear wasteland of 300,000 people, and every building, 90,000 buildings, every one of them were entitled to be decontaminated, but you can't decontaminate a building. Surrounded by millions of one-ton bags of radiation they picked up to manipulate people. With over 3,000 Geiger counters throughout the community that measures in microsieverts. The bags are 100,000 becquerels a kilogram minimum, but the Geiger counters are not measuring becquerels, atomic decays, atoms, physical atoms. They're measuring shine. And that's the absolute opposite of what you would do if you were sincere and genuine. Right? Because they're not measuring the mushrooms in unisieverts or microsieverts, right? Rather, or millisieverts. They're measuring it in physical atoms, which is the decay. So an atom will pulse energy every second. Wild mushrooms harvested in a town in Fukushima tested highest ever radioactive cesium so far in food after the Fukushima 1 nuclear plant accident that I'm aware of. 28,000 becquerels per kilogram. That's nowhere near the highest, by the way. According to the data from the Fukushima prefecture, 13,000 atoms a kilogram of cesium-134 and 15,000 atoms a kilogram of cesium-137 were detected from the mushrooms. So it's leukemia in a frying pan, basically. The town, Tanakura Machi, is located about 73 kilometers southwest of the Daiichi nuclear disease factory. The government, of all people, is going to test mushrooms nearby for radioactive material and put up a sign calling for voluntary halt on harvesting. Not putting up a sign saying don't harvest, but please don't harvest. It's a volunteer. Because if you make it mandatory, you have to evacuate the area. And they're simply never going to do it. They're the most dishonest, disingenuous industry in history. We've never seen anything as evil as nuclear. There's literally nothing can hold a candle to it. In Fukushima Prefecture, 3,200 atoms a kilogram of radioactive cesium. I'm so sick of the word cesium. You got all, what about the curium isotopes, which is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods? Has been detected from Laterius volmus or something, which is that one right there. Who knows? I smurfed up that. Yeah, there it is. We are surprised at the extremely high numbers. Oh, well, I'm not. Tokyo is at 29 million atoms per square meter, for goodness sakes. We will continue to investigate and identify the cause. Like, what are you talking about? Identify the cause? So the comments section pretty well summed it up for us. They should invite these miserable creatures from the Tokyo government up to Fukushima and force feed them the mushrooms. I agree with you. Another one said, add nuclear experts who said plutonium was safe to drink, and the ever-increasing numbers of media celebrities over there called worried mothers hysterical. And did I just read that they will continue to investigate and identify the cause? So I wondered how low man could go, and now I know. Hasn't the behavior of those entrusted with our safety been sadly eye-opening? Hasn't the behavior of those putting greed over their fellow human beings been sadly eye-opening? Another one says, the cause. Let's see, what about the 3 nuclear meltdowns? The uncontrolled reactions ongoing. Oh, and add burning all the radioactive material. They're got 1 billion pounds of radioactive material that they're grinding up and shipping to the prefectures to burn in the local incinerators. Like, it just doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem possible. It just seems too crazy. It also affects other wild forage, like wild berries in the Chernobyl region. And so in British Columbia, bears, for instance, the emaciated grizzly bears, they were trying to blame on the missing salmon. But the grizzly, what it is, they got leukemia. And so they're emaciated from leukemia because they eat about 200,000 berries a day. And the West Coast took a serious beating. So berries are very bad for you, unfortunately. It also affects the wild animals that feed on the berries, like wild boars / grizzly bears. In certain parts of Europe are still too contaminated to eat. And what else eats the berries? Migratory birds. Wild berries in the Chernobyl region, it will also affect the wild animals that feed on them. I wonder what the contamination levels are for shrooms found on the U.S. West Coast and Western Canada. I would say lethal. I was aware that the national limit for radioactive cesium was 500 atoms a kilogram. That was 2011 to 2012. Then they dropped it down to 100 atoms. But they never do check, right? It's never checked. Any contamination found lower than 500 becquerels a kilogram is okay for consumption. In your personal point of view, do you think any value below the limit is reasonable for consumption? There is no safe limit. A single anthropogenic man-made atom sequestered in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Your body attacks it every second for the rest of your life with white blood cells to build a sarcophagus around it. We call it a tumor. It might take 10, 20, 30 years, but it will eventually build a tumor around it. But the problem with the anthropogenic man-made atoms is they pulse energy almost at the speed of light for long distances. And so that wrecks the chromosomes, your DNA, your cells, and causes permanent lesions to your organs, for instance, and permanent damage to the hearts of birds and insects and children and that. Fukushima Prefecture announced on September the 3rd that 28,000 atoms a kilogram of radioactive cesium were detected from the wild mushrooms harvested in the mountains in Tanakura Mashi. The level of radioactive cesium vastly exceeded the national provisional safety limits of. So the limit before Fukushima in Japan was 0.01, or I'm sorry, 0.1 becquerel a kilogram. They dropped that limit to 100 atoms, aka becquerels, which is a pulse of energy from each atom, every second, but they're not checking. And the Geiger counters, like when you're checking a lot with a Geiger counter in a nuclear wasteland, you're going to destroy the calibration of the Geiger counter. Because if you hit a hot spot, the Geiger counter is not going to work anymore. You have to send it back to see if it can be recalibrated, or maybe it's too radioactive to keep anymore on top of that. It's a very slippery slope, and using a Geiger counter is a science. It's not just turn it on, have a nice day. It doesn't work that way. There's a specific routine you have to do with a Geiger counter. And the Geiger counters are basically useless. You know, yeah, you'll find some, but you won't find the actual significance. And generally how it works, right, you would need a really nice Geiger counter, an expensive one, and it's calibrated to a certain isotope that you know is going to show up. And then you do a mathematical extrapolation from that number. So for, say if it looks for 131, so say it's finding 131. Well, there's going to be 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine, 129. And then the ratio is going to be 100 to 1 of strontium 90 for every cesium 137, for instance. Right, so there's mathematical equations that you're not, the average person has no concept exist, and that is appropriately. And some of the experts will say you got to multiply whatever number you're finding on your Geiger counter by 600 if you want to get the actual numbers. I gotta watch what I'm doing there for water. A protest against nuclear power. And Shinjuku turned bloody as the police roughed up protesters on the 6-month anniversary. The police didn't rough them up, they beat them up. But the links, they told you to go to the links were always, as usual, sorry, there's none to be found. There were other protests at that time that I did find, that are these pictures, but I didn't get the pictures of the police beating up the protesters. But we do have headlines about that, right? Excuse me. Would the world be better off without the degenerate, dirty nuclear power plants that are also known as disease factories? A couple of people accidentally voted no. That's okay, I forgive you. It's obviously an accident. Nobody would vote no on purpose. My goodness. Sham symposium in Fukushima focuses on forced public compliance. That's a great way to frame it. Forced public compliance. And they got John Boyce's in this one. We got a video, John, we'll play for you. Sponsored by the Nippon Foundation, which was involved in forced sterilization in Peru, right? The International Atomic Degenerate Agency, the ICRP scumbags, and featuring Dr. 100 millisieverts and remember Dr. Smoil? Radiation doesn't hurt you if you smile, guy. Yamashita, one of the few main speakers. The foundation's I can't even pronounce it, I forget now. My apologies. Or constitute an important part of the official Japanese lobbying efforts to foster and maintain a favorable image of Japan, known by the euphemism improving mutual understanding. The Nippon Foundation was also involved in forced sterilization programs in Peru. And the fact that they're featuring Dr. Yamashita after he made a mockery of the disaster victims, and that's putting it politely, and caused great confusion with what actually is safe, shows the true nature of the symposium. The International Atomic Energy Agency has had credibility problems. No, they're a public relation firm for the nuclear industry. They have no credibility. As part of their charter is to promote nuclear power, and the ICRP is largely funded by the nuclear industry, again, questioning the objectivity of all parties involved. This is the objective of the conference according to the Nippon Foundation. They hope to correct the misconceptions and confusions that have spread, not only among the Japanese people, but around the world as a result of lack of detailed information on the dispersions of radioactivity. Radiation streaming into the atmosphere of number 4, fuel pool boil dry. And it just seems like nothing phases these people. Again, like if it's incredibly evil, then that's the go-to for these people. Like every model showed the planet being covered within 20 to 60 days. Every model. And every study confirmed it. Dr. Yamashita and the Japanese government have begun actively promoting the idea that the problem in Japan is actually radiophobia. They picked up 30 million one-ton bags, but the problem is radiophobia. In attempts to downplay the scope of the disaster, discredit anyone who tries to stand against the downplaying of the disaster, looking at the parties involved in the stated goal, nothing good for the people of Japan or the larger world will come out of that symposium. And I think this is not just hyperbole at this conference, is an attempt to deny the disaster and force people into dangerous compliance. Read some of the statements out of the people running the symposium given to the media at today's session of the conference. A U.S. epidemiologist, John Boyce, said he does not think people's health will be affected by the Fukushima accident. He said Japan prevented the contaminated food from being distributed, unlike what happened at Chernobyl, which this is simply not true. He said counseling and timely information are essential for those worried about radiation in food. I got a little clip of John Boyce, actually. The perpetually degenerate John Boyce. If I can find it. I got Kyle Vetter. Scumbag Arnie Gunnarsson. We got them all, the crazies, eh? Just bear with me, I'll find it. Because it wasn't that long ago we played one of his clips. I'm struggling. I thought he was right there. Sorry. he should have been right there. Just let me do a quick search here. Maybe. Yep, figures there he is. He's going to tell you who he is, but he's an actual monster, and he's in charge of the cancer center. It's unbelievable how these people.
It should take away with it that the exposures to the populations are very, very low, and as such, there's no opportunity to conduct epidemiologic studies that have any chance of detecting excess risks. The doses are just too low. Something too on the meter, just to mention, even though I spent all this time right next to the reactors, I received more radiation on my transcontinental flights from Tokyo to Washington than I did at the reactor site. So I tried to use that in terms of, yeah, the meters went off scale, but it's not that it was off scale, and I didn't stay there that long to even get a meaningful
I was
dose.
very concerned, Dr. Boyce, when you see that meter doing this number, I think I would turn and go the other way.
Yeah, I know. My name is John Boyce. I'm professor of medicine at Vanderbilt University and also the president-elect of the National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements. And I'm a radiation epidemiologist. My entire career, I've studied populations all over the world exposed to ionizing radiation, including Chernobyl cleanup workers, medical populations, workers, underground miners. I'm one of the delegates to the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, and we're reviewing the Fukushima situation now. I'm also on the main commission of the International Commission on Radiological Protection, where we have a task force where we're also trying to evaluate the lessons learned from the Fukushima circumstances. I'm also on the Veterans Advisory Board for dose reconstruction, which also is involved in providing some oversights and thoughts on our U.S. military that were around Fukushima and helped with the recovery. In March of last year, the week before the tsunami hit and the earthquake, I was in Hiroshima on the Science Council for the Radiation Effects Research Foundation, and this is where the joint governments, the United States and Japan, we continue to study the atomic bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's been ongoing for over 60 years. A week later, I had left Tokyo, and then the horrific natural disaster occurred. I then went back to Fukushima in September as part of an expert panel in Fukushima City, where scientists from all over the world were providing advice to the Japanese authorities and the Japanese government with regard to circumstances of what could be done in the...
In other words, this is a real-life monster, right? This is just unbelievable that people like that can even exist. It's pure madness. The lack of action on contaminated food and widespread problems. I mean, they're growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation, millions of 1-ton bags of radiation. It defies any rational. In Japan is well documented. Boyce's comments that insinuates that people concerned about food safety need counseling, as if the food problems in their heads is simply unbelievable. I don't think unbelievable does quite sums it up. John Boyce has a long track record of being a talking head. And now he's in positions where he's making the rules for your country, he's making rules for your hospitals, he's making the rules for your children of radiation. And he's an actual real-life monster. And every one of those people in those councils, this is what we know about them. That these are the people that are setting the policies for countries, and your country included, and your loved ones in the hospital that are being murdered by radiation. They're the ones that are setting the permissible lethal doses. They're real monsters. They're actual real-life Draculas. They're real-life werewolves. They're real-life villains. like Raphael Grossi, a real-life supervillain is a better appropriate way to look at these people. These are supervillains. From other representatives at the conference, some said the radiation levels following the Fukushima accident should have been made public, as they were much lower than the levels deemed safe by scientists. And there was also a suggestion that comparative data with other risks, such as traffic accidents, should have been made available. And this is a garbage can diagnosis we hear all the time, right? Makoto Akashi, whose organization is co-sponsoring the gathering, said he hopes to find ways to convince people that there will be no health impact from the radiation from Fukushima. The column monsters just doesn't quite cover it. There was 865,000 excess cancers in the first year. Not everybody got health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. And then he was talking about one writer from Germany who detailed the questionable history of these kinds of conferences and how the same type of conference was used after Chernobyl to blame the victims for the problems of the disaster and so they can deny them compensation, which is what BP oil done, right? BP oil is the reason we hear the word carbon footprint. It was a campaign, a public relation campaign through all the media by BP oil to blame you for wanting oil. And now we're stuck with it because United Nations scooped it up. And so when I went to that link, again the link is gone. Highly radioactive Fukushima town reopens. Highly radioactive. Well, when you see a picture like that, going back is not an option. Katsuru currently has radiation levels 2050 millisieverts a year. But why would you count it in millisieverts when you're talking about physical atoms? So 50 millisieverts is well, millisievert is 1,000 microsieverts, right? So 50,000 microsieverts. You want to multiply it by 750. Where are my two here? So you want to multiply it 50,000 times 750 atoms. It's 37 million. So you're talking about 37 million atoms getting into each person's body, and each atom is pulsing energy at the speed of light, wrecking chromosomes, DNA, and cells. Your body has to repair everything every second, and then it's going to pulse 37,500,000 pulses a second in your body for the rest of your life. So your body's going to be flooded with white blood cells. You're going to have no energy, and you're not going to be uptaking any nutrition because you have no red blood cells, which is what they call leukemia, right? So Katsuru is not behind me. You can see the distances. 10 miles, 20 miles, 30, 40 miles or something. But that whole area is one great big stupid nuclear wasteland. Just that section up right there, right? Like Minamasoma, Lydia, Koriyama. So it's between Fukushima, Nami, and Koriyama. Koriyama is a nuclear wasteland. The whole industry is insane. Government decided to reopen the town, that's 2016, allowing residents to live there, and this declaration also serves to remove a protection for the evacuees who receive compensation. So they say, no, you can go back, and that's the town there. You can go back, it's safe. And so if you don't go back, now you have no. Well, you got no choice to go back because you can't afford to live anywhere else if you can't get a job. If you're retired or something, or you're sick from the radiation, which of course is everybody. Without the restrictions, many may lose their payments, compelling them to return to the highly radioactive town. And the town currently has no operating businesses or services, but only 10% of the town residents have decided to return. No one decided to return on purpose. So when you click on another link and it's all gone. They got rid of the evidence, didn't they? Right, the big media. So we're very fortunate to have these stories. Like, it's hard to comprehend how. It is worth noting that the women and children are much more susceptible to radiation exposures and health damages, and that the nuclear workers' radiation limits are based on adult male workers. Fukushima soil road reuse plan ignores significant risk. This is another one of these strange stories, and I showed you earlier 30 million one-ton bags, right? The government plan would take any contaminated soil under the 8,000 atoms a kilogram hazardous waste limits and use it to build roads. So 8,000 atoms a kilogram. 8,000. So you got to multiply that by 66.6 to get a square meter. Is 532,000 atoms per square meter. That's more than the definition. 185 per square meter at a nuclear site used to be an evacuation zone. 532,000 in your community per square meter. Again, they're only talking about cesium. And the bags, by the way, the minimum for the bags was 100,000 atoms per kilogram, not 8,000. One of the systemic problems with the radioactive contamination monitoring processes in Japan is that most standards and almost all of the monitoring is strictly for gamma radiation. Well, it's strictly for cesium-137 and 134, if you're lucky. This ignores betas and alphas and neutrons and X-rays in the soil that would contribute to the human exposures. And both of these can cause even more severe exposure impact through inhalation and ingestion than gamma radiation. Well, gamma radiation, of course, pulses energy 600 feet every second. Right through your house. No problem at all either. Most of the remaining alpha and beta radiation are also long-lived isotopes, meaning they won't go away any time in the near future or in the next millenniums. The method required to turn the radioactive waste into road dirt would include transferring it out of the current storage bags, trucking it to various road sites. This, along with the spreading the material to build a road base, would redistribute the dirt and the dust to the air, allowing it to spread. And road workers and nearby residents could inhale the dust, causing internal contamination. And the dust settling underwater agricultural fields or gardens could contaminate food and water. And contaminated material will still leach out as the road decay, collapse during earthquakes, or washed out in flooding and otherwise fail over time. That's 100% true. This story is insane. Fukushima Unit 2 Muon scan shows no fuel in the reactor. And wait till you see what he says is true. Because this one is a total betrayal of the academics. TEPCO released preliminary information from the second Muon scan of Unit 2 at Fukushima Daiichi. Now we know that that's 100% meltdown and the fuel pools that have burnt for days and that are liquefied and went into the earth. This, including the fuel pools. The scan finds no fuel in the reactor vessel, and this scanner can detect masses of fuel 1 meter or larger. The scan did not identify the fuel, or did identify the fuel in the spent fuel pool. It did identify the fuel in the fuel pool. That's what they're saying. And by doing that, it helped confirm that the system is working properly and the results are accurate. So have a nice day. In reality, though, there is no fuel in the fuel pool, period. And so they'll take all of this stuff and they say, well, you know, here's the fuel. We're going to make plans to get it out of the fuel pool. Have a nice day. Reactor 2 burned constantly for days. There's nothing in the fuel pool. Or the reactor core. There's simply nothing there. What do we got here? Reactor 2 is no longer sealed. French Nuclear Safety Authority. The fuel is no longer there. Well, it got up around 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Bear with me. Melted fuel cores melted right down into the ground. Don't believe TEPCO. This is another crazy story. Strontium 90 found in throughout Japan from Fukushima. So they're reporting in March 16th to the 19th, TEPCO detected 2,800 becquerels of strontium, 89 per kilogram of soil. But what they found in Strontium 90, they claimed, in 2012 was 3.3 to 32 becquerels of strontium 90 per kilogram of the soil samples in Nami town and Lydiate village, 30 kilometers from the plant. The interesting thing about strontium 90 is that after about 1,000 days it peaks when there's a nuclear meltdown. And the ratio is 100 to 1 of cesium-137. So it's still a huge number, around 30 to 1 just after the accident. But it peaks, it triples after about 3 years and stays that way for tens of thousands of days. 80, 90 years at least anyway, before it starts slowly going. And I shouldn't say that because I'm not 100% sure in that statement, so I withdraw that comment. So French's studies showed 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 covering the northern hemisphere, Canada, United States, Mexico, sustained plumes, continuous plumes, within 6 days of the last detonation. So the 22nd or something of March 2011. So you would have 30 times more strontium-90 in that particular model, see? Strontium-90, by the way, found 245 kilometers was 150 times the background, not 2 or 3 atoms per kilogram, you disgusting parasite industry. Fukushima plant 40 meters from Japan, 1.1 billion atoms per cubic meter of strontium-90 and other beta emitters. Feared highly contaminated waters leaking. Every time you hear the word leaking, like how anybody can look at these buildings and use the word leaking defies. They stop being a human right then and there. Yeah, 30 times more strontium-90 than the much cesium in Fukushima. Strontium is much more dangerous. This is a problem. Researchers far from the plant surprised by how much continuing radioactivity they found, like an ongoing experiment. But so the plume of cesium-137 that the French identified as 1,000,000 to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air covering the northern hemisphere can sustain the whole planet, actually, would have had pre-2013 at least 30 times more strontium-90 for every 137, and the 137 was prolific, right? Excuse me. I actually got that study right here. It was the French government at 1,000,000 times normal after Fukushima. It was 1,000,000 to 10 million atoms of cesium-137. But the model is only based on the 18th, which is 7 days after the tsunami and 2 days after the last reactor blew up, the original detonations. Some of these reactors blew up all the way up to day 20. Contamination rampant in Miyagi Prefecture. Speedy Records, and Speedy made over 5,000, which is a modeling system for radiation, made over 5,500 models in the first 30 days. Paid for by the taxpayers and was never released to them. They were given to the American military right away, though. Speedy Records released this year showed considerable radioactive plume and disposition over Miyagi Prefecture around March the 20th. A local expert was asked by some towns in Miyagi to take radiation measurements, and the prefecture government barred her from taking readings, claiming they weren't necessary. So a local expert was asked by some towns to do the radiation measurements, but the government banned them from doing the radiation measurements. And most areas in Miyagi are under a voluntarily ban on pasture grazing. Again, because if you go voluntary, then you don't have to evacuate the area. Because the government puts a ban on it, it basically means you got to evacuate it. And just by the suggestion meant they should have evacuated it again. Measurements taken in the north end of the prefecture showed 242 becquerels a kilogram of cesium in the soil. 242. 642. So about 31 million atoms per square meter. This area has been added to the voluntary ban. So what do you mean voluntary ban? It's either contaminated or it's not. If it's contaminated, then it's not a voluntary ban. It's an exodus. You have to leave there. It's an absurd betrayal, isn't it? One spot tested was in the hundreds of thousands of becquerels per kilogram. Hundreds of thousands. We're going to do the math on that, I think. Let's do the math on that one. Hundreds of thousands. So let's say 350,000. Let's be polite. So 350,000 per kilogram multiplied by 66.6 to get a square meter. I screwed up something, did I? I guess not. Oh, I was thinking about something else. So 23,000 atoms per square meter. The mushrooms from Miyagi, northernmost region of Kurihara City, had 1,400 atoms a kilogram of cesium. So it would have had 30 times more strontium-90. Would have had 30 times more strontium-90. So 1,400 times 30 is I'm getting lazy now. 42,000. All found to be contaminated from Miyagi. Household dust collected from vacuum cleaners in Miyagi Prefecture had between 3,200 and 7,200 atoms per kilogram of cesium. These are insane numbers, by the way. Urine testing for children and young adults in Miyagi has also shown contamination in recent testing. And the government has pressured universities and researchers to not conduct their own health studies in the region. The government has also discouraged doctors from testing or treating patients in the region for radiation-related medical concerns. So the government pressured universities and researchers to not conduct their health studies in the region, and that the government discouraged doctors from testing or treating patients. Japanese burger chain busted using restricted Fukushima food in Taiwan. Again, this is 2015. Moe's Burger, Japanese. Moe's Burger is in trouble in Taiwan for importing mislabeled food products to their stores in Taiwan. And one of the sauce mixes used by the chain was labeled as being produced in Tokyo, which is a nuclear wasteland, but was actually produced in Tochigi Prefecture. You shouldn't import anything from Japan. Like, you have to be insane to import anything, any kind of food from Japan. You literally have to be a real-life monster, an absolute monster. Somebody has no right to be in the population whatsoever. The latter location, one of the prefectures under food import restrictions in Taiwan. The company will be fined for false customs declarations by the Taiwanese government. Well, they just murdered thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people. So you poison all these people and they get a fucking fine? You despicable scum. Unit 4 removal. What you need to know. Is like, I'm always speechless when I see that, right? Unit 4 removal. Well, there's Unit 4, and the fuel is at the top of the building. It got removed on the fourth day or the fifth day. All of it. Oh. This is insane. So the media, and we show that all the time, right? The media pretends they're in a building that doesn't even exist. And everybody sits there and lets them get away with it. Bear with me. I do it the hard way. There's so many of them that done that, right? There wasn't just Rupert Winfield Hayes from the BBC. Arnie Gunnarsson and Megan Gunnarsson done it. Helen Caldicott done it. Let's play Mrs. Tidy. Just for an old pick-me-up here. Hang on. So Helen Caldicott was asked about Reactor 4. She's affectionately known around here as Crazy Lady. Make sure I get the right one. And this one here. This is a short version. So Helen's being asked. That's the video. The original video's up there. I put these two pictures, and the other pictures you'll see flashing. But that's actually Reactor 4, and that's both of these are the official pictures. That's actually Reactor 4, and that's Reactor 4. Both of them current pictures. Now they officially deny that is Reactor 4. But listen to Helen Calicat. She's done this interview hundreds of times where she's asked, does the reactor really look like the one to the left or does it look like the one on the right? And the answer shouldn't shock you.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
But it can't be tidy, Helen. It doesn't work that way. It's a nuclear meltdown. It's a nuclear meltdown. Should somebody tell Helen Calicat it's an actual nuclear meltdown? Arnie Gunnison does the same thing, basically, right? Unit 4 removal, what you need to know is Helen showed you. Of course, Helen's lying. Helen's one of the biggest nuclear activists on the planet, for goodness sakes. She wrote 14 anti-nuclear books. She's invited to all the rallies, all the symposiums. She even holds them, right? And yet Helen is telling you that Reactor 4 looks like the building to the left, not the one to the right, which is Reactor 4. There are lots of concerns about the upcoming fuel removal work at Unit 4. Well, you can't remove fuel from a building that doesn't exist. They've done the same thing at Reactor 3. They pretend that they're in the fuel pool, but that's all they're doing. They're pretending, right? Hang on, here you go. And this is 2014. 2013, November the 7th, the media, members of the media and Tokyo Electric Power Company employees walked down the steps of the fuel handling machine after looking at the spent fuel inside of the building housing the Unit 4 reactor at the Fukushima Daiichi. It's simply not true. Right? It's simply not true. All the crazies are out. If you think nuclear's crazy, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm just kidding you. I don't give a shit if anybody subscribes. I'm here to go to war for humanity and the 8 million species. Let me find the video. Here we go. Let's use this one here. So those people are saying that they're in the building to the left. If you think they're not in the building to the left, give me a thumbs up. If you think they're in the building to the left, give me a thumbs up too. If you think they're 150 feet above the stump to your left, I should say, give me a thumbs up. If you don't think they're there, give me a thumbs up. Because that's what they're claiming, right? And how many times have I played the video here? 6,000 or something? 7,000 or whatever times. You think I'm kidding, right? No. We played that video I'm surprised. If it was a VCR, it would have broke a fucking half a decade ago. Nuclear is stupid and evil, and that's a fucking dangerous combination. It's stupid fucking evil. That's the best way to describe it. Here's Arnie Gunnarsson. He's up in the fuel pool. Coming up in a second. One mention it was 2 fuel rods touching could cause a massive uncontrolled chain reaction.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Let me do that again.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
For 70 reactors like Fukushima, exact replicas. And so I put his picture up where the fuel pool is too. He made the racks for the reactor core assemblies. So if he doesn't know the fuel pool's gone, who actually does, right? And he's out there like Helen Caldecott doing hundreds of interviews, telling people we dodged the bullet, folks. The fuel pools could have went. And he used to make the racks for the assemblies, so he knows. So who are you going to trust, right? This guy worked in the industry. His wife was a spokesperson for the nuclear industry for 2 decades. That tells you everything you need to know right there. Condition in the Unit 4 pool 100 feet from the ground are perleous. And if any 2 of the rods, it's 140 feet, 145 feet above ground, could cause a nuclear reaction that would be uncontrollable. And that's maybe 30 feet above the ground, the building. Another concern is about having the pool drainer collapse. Because if it drains or collapses, it's going to look like that over there, which is, Reactor 4. But thank God it didn't happen, because the media told you it didn't happen, so it must not have happened, right? This is complicated by Unit 4 by having small debris in the fuel racks and suspected damage to some of the fuel. Well, let's have a look at the building. The fuel pool is about 100 feet above that stump over there. Yeah, it looks good to me. How about you? All 1,500 fuel units do not show fuel melting, but a hydrogen explosion, possibly caused by hydrogen coming in from Reactor 3, occurred. Let's see what happened here. Well, I think you had more than the hydrogen. The hydrogen is caused by the nuclear meltdown. Because you could say, right, that when number 3 detonated, the explosion felt 25 miles away, was thrown these assemblies which weigh 1,800 pounds, got 100 fuel rods in it that are 12 pounds each, or 18 pounds each, and they're 12 feet long. So these are projectiles. But what happened was it went straight up. We got the pictures of it, and yes, some of it could have come down and hit Unit 4. But the more likely scenario was that Reactor 4 you didn't have any water, and it was. Why don't we see the explosion of Reactor 4? We got explosions of videos of Reactor 1 and 3, which are right alongside of Reactor 4. They're all in that same little group. So if you got the explosions of them, why don't you have an explosion of the Reactor 4? Because I can guarantee you Reactor 4 was a doozy. The hydrogen is coming from the nuclear meltdown. They even got a little truck there, look. These are monsters, these people. And so they said there was at that time, June 10, 2014, that there were 500 fuel assemblies left to remove. New Strontium 90 removal system to be installed at Fukushima Daiichi. Well, they got the right picture up there, didn't they? That's the appropriate picture. You can't remove Strontium 90 without removing all the other isotopes. All the atoms are the same size. Because that's how it actually works. Science. The other science is When I'm out of water, that means the show's over. Oh, we only got 1, 2, 3, 4 clicks to go. Well, that's light. 3 clicks to go. Now we got 1 to go, and that's it here. The Curium would provide a truck-backed filter system to remove strontium-90 from contaminated water currently held in storage tanks at Fukushima 2014. So that's quite the departure from the official story today, right? But the reality of it is you can't filter any of it. You have to filter all of it. Like, you have to keep all of it. You can't actually filter the atoms. You can put 200 million atoms of any isotope on the head of a needle, and you can't see it. So how the fuck are you going to filter out 10,000? If you got 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, how are you going to filter out 10,000 strontium-90? Because a single one of them can cause you a permanent disease that ends up destroying your health. Let's kind of close the poll down, I guess. Would the world be better off without the degenerate nuclear power plants, also known as disease factory? Clearly that's true. The world would be so much better off. There would be all kinds of bees and whales and animals and birds and insects. It'd just be wonderful. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. Have a great day tomorrow. See everybody on the next show. Take care, folks. The only reason the industry is winning is because there's not enough people doing this. And the ones that are doing it can't really effectively come after the industry, right? I don't have the resources. And then any pro-nuclear will have so much resources, it's mind-numbing. And so who's going to win that battle? I'm going to be here as many times as I can. I have many years now. Pushing back, hopefully. And my idea was, well, I don't have the ability to do it myself, so I'll just educate the population in increments forever, and we'll win the battle that way, right? Have a great night. I'll see everybody on the next one. Take care, folks.